The scent of ceremonial incense clung to my skin like a second layer of shame. I scrubbed harder at the stone floor, my knees raw against the cold surface, fingernails lined with the dirt of others' celebrations. The great hall echoed with emptiness now, though just hours ago it had vibrated with the primal energy of the pack's most sacred ritual, the annual mating ceremony. I hadn't been invited, of course. No one wanted the pack's weakest link tainting such a precious occasion. Instead, I was summoned afterward, when the moon had already begun its descent, to erase all evidence that something magical had occurred. Like always, I was the afterthought. The human utility kept around for tasks deemed too menial for those with true power. "You missed a spot, Ellie," said Mira, her voice dripping with the casual cruelty she reserved specially for me. As beta female, second only to the queen in our rigid hierarchy, she took particular pleasure in reminding me of my place. She pointed a perfectly manicured nail toward a dark stain near the ceremonial altar. Blood wine. Very difficult to remove once it sets. I nodded, keeping my eyes lowered as I'd been taught since childhood. "I'll take care of it. See that you do." Her footsteps clicked across the hall, the sound sharp against the ancient stones. "The king inspects at dawn. The king." My heart stuttered at the mere mention of him. Not that it mattered. In the 3 years since I'd been brought to the Packlands as an orphaned, distant relative, I'd never once been in his presence. Alphas don't concern themselves with the existence of humans who can't transform, who possess no special abilities, who serve only to keep their sacred spaces clean. When Mira finally left, I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing against the cool surface of my mother's silver pendant. The last remnant of a life before this one. The small crescent moon etched into its surface had almost completely worn away from years of my nervous touch. "Strength flows not from power, but from perseverance," my mother would whisper as she tucked me into bed. Those words had become my silent mantra, especially in moments like these. The pendant was forbidden, of course. Humans in the pack weren't allowed personal possessions, especially ones with silver, toxic to werewolves in large quantities. But this tiny piece was my anchor to sanity, to the memory that I had once been somebody's beloved daughter, rather than just a shadow slipping through grand hallways with a mop and bucket. I returned to scrubbing, working my way toward the central altar where the ceremony's most sacred acts had taken place. The stone basin still held remnants of the ritual, crushed herbs, wine, and something darker that I tried not to examine too closely. This was where unmated werewolves presented themselves to potential partners, where they released their most primal sense, where the dance of dominance and submission began. My nose wrinkled at the overwhelming blend of aromas, musk and pine, cinnamon and rain, each scent a declaration of identity and power. I had no such declaration. Humans like me barely registered a scent at all, which was another reason we were tolerated for menial work. We didn't disrupt the complex olfactory communication that governed pack life. As I leaned over to wipe the basin, my pendant slipped from my pocket, landing with a soft clink against the stone. I froze, listening for any sign that someone might have heard, might be coming to investigate. When silence continued to reign, I quickly retrieved it, but not before it had touched the ceremonial remnants within the basin. Something strange happened then, a soft hiss, like water on hot metal, and a wisp of silver vapor rose from where my pendant had made contact. I watched, transfixed, as the vapor seemed to wrap itself around me for the briefest moment before dissolving into nothing. A shiver raced up my spine. Whatever had just happened couldn't be good. Interaction with ceremonial elements was strictly forbidden to someone of my status. I worked faster now, desperate to erase any evidence of my accidental transgression. The eastern windows began to lighten with the first hint of dawn as I finished the last of my tasks. My back ached, my hands were raw, but the great hall gleamed as required. I gathered my cleaning supplies, eager to disappear before anyone of importance arrived. I was nearly at the servants' exit when the massive double doors at the main entrance swung open with such force that they slammed against the stone walls. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder, stopping my heart and my feet simultaneously. He filled the doorway completely, not just with his physical form, though that was imposing enough, but with an energy so potent it seemed to electrify the very air. The Alpha King. Even having never seen him before, I knew instantly who stood before me. No one else could command such presence, such immediate and absolute authority. Something primal in me wanted to run, but a stronger instinct kept me rooted to the spot, head bowed, breath trapped in my lungs. I became achingly aware of my disheveled appearance, threadbare cleaning clothes, hair hastily tied back, hands red and chapped from hours of work. His footsteps were deliberate as he entered, each one sending vibrations through the stone floor. I kept my eyes fixed on those boots as they crossed the hall, handcrafted leather that probably cost more than everything I would earn in my lifetime. "You're the cleaning girl." His voice was deep, textured like aged whiskey, and not actually framed as a question. "Yes, Your Majesty." My voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "Look at me." The command sent a jolt through my body. We weren't supposed to look directly at pack royalty. It was considered an act of challenge or disrespect, but a direct order from the king himself couldn't be ignored. Slowly, I raised my eyes, taking in powerful legs encased in dark fabric, a torso wrapped in a shirt that did little to conceal the strength beneath, broad shoulders, and finally, his face. The stories hadn't exaggerated. King Callan was devastatingly handsome in that untouchable, dangerous way of apex predators. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a winter forest, green with flecks of gold. Those eyes widened slightly as they met mine, his nostrils flaring in what I recognized as the gesture werewolves made when catching a new scent. Impossible. Humans like me barely registered to their sensitive noses. "Your name." Again, not a question but a command. "Eleanor, Your Majesty. Most call me Ellie." He took a step closer, and it took every ounce of willpower not to step back. "You cleaned the altar?" Fear clutched at my throat. Had I done something wrong? Missed something crucial? "Yes, Your Majesty. As instructed by Beta Mira." Another step closer. He was near enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the subtle shifts of color in his irises as they caught the morning light. His scent wrapped around me, earth after rain, cedar smoke, and something wild that made my pulse quicken. "How long have you served in this pack?" 3 years, Your Majesty. Since I was 17. His head tilted slightly, a gesture I'd seen other werewolves make when something puzzled them. "And in all that time, you've never attended a ceremony? Never been presented?" The question confused me. Presented? Like the unmated werewolves at the ceremony? A nervous laugh almost escaped before I caught it. "No, Your Majesty. I'm human. We aren't part of those traditions." Something dangerous flickered across his expression. "Human," he repeated, as though testing the word. Then, with a movement too swift for me to track, his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist where my pulse hammered frantically. I gasped at the contact, not from pain, but from the electric current that seemed to flow from his skin to mine. No one touched me. Not like this. Not with purpose. The king's eyes dilated, the gold flecks seeming to expand and consume the green. "You're not just human," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. Confusion and fear tangled in my chest. "I don't understand. You're sent," he interrupted, pulling me closer, his face lowering toward my neck in a gesture that sent alarm bells ringing through my head. This was not how kings behaved with cleaning staff. This was not normal pack protocol. "It's changed. He inhaled deeply, his nose tracing a line from my collarbone to just behind my ear, and I stood paralyzed, caught between terror and a strange, unwelcome heat that bloomed low in my belly. "Impossible," he whispered. But I wasn't sure if he was speaking to me or himself. The pendant in my pocket felt suddenly heavy, as though reminding me of its presence, of the strange vapor that had enveloped me at the altar. Had that done something to me? Changed me somehow? The king's grip on my wrist tightened as he pulled back just enough to look into my eyes again. "The ceremony last night, did anything unusual happen while you were cleaning?" I should lie. Every instinct screamed that admitting to interfering with ceremonial elements would mean punishment, perhaps even expulsion from the pack, but something in his gaze compelled honesty, as though he could see straight through any deception I might attempt. "My pendant," I whispered. It fell into the altar basin. There was a strange silver vapor, but it disappeared almost immediately. His expression darkened, jaw clenching as he processed this information. "Show me." With trembling fingers, I reached into my pocket with my free hand and withdrew the silver crescent. The king's eyes fixed on it, recognition flashing across his features. "Where did you get this?" His voice had gone dangerously soft. "It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her." He released my wrist suddenly, stepping back as though I'd burned him. For a long moment, he simply stared at me, and I couldn't begin to interpret the complex emotions that crossed his face. Shock, anger, calculation, and something else. Something hungry. "Finish your duties," he finally said, his voice returning to that commanding tone that allowed no argument. "Then report to my private study, immediately." Before I could respond, before I could ask any of the 100 questions racing through my mind, he turned and strode toward the doors, pausing only briefly to look back over his shoulder. "And Eleanor? Speak to no one of what happened here." His eyes locked with mine one final time. "You belong to me now." The doors closed behind him with a decisive thud, leaving me alone in the great hall, heart racing, body trembling with fear and a terrible, confusing excitement. Everything had changed in the space of minutes, though I couldn't begin to understand how or why. All I knew was that the king, the most powerful alpha werewolf in the territory, perhaps in the entire continent, had looked at me, had scented me, had claimed me as his own. And whether that meant my salvation or my doom, I would soon find out. I stood frozen in the great hall long after the king had departed, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. "You belong to me now." His words echoed in my head, both terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. What could he possibly want with me? And what had my pendant done to change my scent? My hands shook as I gathered the cleaning supplies. Whatever awaited me in the king's private study, I couldn't delay it. In our pack, the Alpha's word was absolute law. Disobedience wasn't an option. I hurried down the servants' corridor, hoping to make myself at least somewhat presentable before answering his summons. The communal washing area was mercifully empty this early in the morning. I scrubbed my hands until the raw skin stung, splashed cold water on my face, and attempted to tame my long blonde hair into a neater braid. The looking glass reflected a pale, frightened young woman with eyes too large for her face, unremarkable in every way that mattered to the werewolf hierarchy. Yet somehow, impossibly, I had caught the attention of the most powerful male in our territory. "You can do this," I whispered to my reflection, touching the pendant now safely tucked beneath my shirt. "Strength flows not from power, but from perseverance." Finding the king's private study proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. The royal wing of the pack house was forbidden territory to servants, unless specifically summoned. And even then, we typically used separate entrances and hallways. I'd never had reason to venture this deep into the heart of the Alpha's domain. The corridor widened as I moved further from the servants' quarters, the stone floors giving way to polished wood, rough walls replaced by elegant tapestries depicting pack history and legendary hunts. I felt painfully out of place, like a gray moth that had accidentally fluttered into a gathering of butterflies. "Lost, little human?" I startled at the voice, turning to find a tall, lean werewolf leaning against the wall, watching me with undisguised curiosity. His relaxed posture couldn't quite mask the predatory alertness in his eyes. "I'm looking for the king's private study," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "He summoned me." The werewolf's eyebrows shot up, surprise quickly replaced by skepticism. Did he now? And why would our illustrious Alpha request the presence of a cleaning girl in his private chambers? Heat rushed to my cheeks. When he phrased it that way, it sounded inappropriate, scandalous even. "I don't know," I answered honestly, but he ordered me to report to him immediately. He studied me for a moment longer, then abruptly pushed himself off the wall. "Follow me. I'm Nathaniel, by the way. The king's personal guard and occasionally his keeper of strays." I bristled at being called a stray, but kept my mouth shut as I followed him down the corridor. Self-preservation had taught me when to swallow my pride. "Did something happen in the Great Hall?" Nathaniel asked casually, though I sensed nothing casual about his interest. The king's warning flashed through my mind. "Speak to no one of what happened here." I was just finishing my cleaning duties when His Majesty arrived to inspect the hall, I said carefully. He had additional tasks for me. Nathaniel's sidelong glance told me he didn't quite believe me, but he didn't press further as we turned down another corridor, this one even more opulent than the last. Finally, we stopped before a set of imposing double doors carved with the pack's emblem, a howling wolf, beneath a crescent moon. My heart stuttered at the sight of that crescent, so similar to the one hidden against my skin. "Wait here," Nathaniel instructed, then rapped sharply on the door before entering. I stood in the hallway, trying to calm my racing pulse, straining to hear the murmured conversation beyond the heavy doors. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only moments, Nathaniel reappeared. "He'll see you now," he said, holding the door open. As I moved to pass him, he added in a low voice, "Whatever he wants from you, little human, remember your place. The king's attention is rarely a blessing." With those ominous words ringing in my ears, I stepped into the study. The room was not what I expected. Rather than the ostentatious display of power I'd imagined, the space felt almost intimate. Shelves lined with leather-bound books covered one wall, a massive desk of dark wood dominated the center, and a sitting area with comfortable-looking chairs surrounded a stone fireplace, where flames crackled softly. King Callan stood with his back to me, gazing out a large window that overlooked the forest and mountains beyond. The morning light caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of deep auburn. He'd changed from his ceremonial clothes into something more casual, though no less regal. A simple black shirt that clung to the broad planes of his back and pants that accentuated powerful legs. "Your Majesty," I said quietly, dropping into the Kirsty we'd been taught to perform in the presence of royalty. "You sent for me." "Eleanor." He turned, and I was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "Come closer." I obeyed, moving to stand before his desk, hands clasped tightly in front of me to hide their trembling. "Do you know the significance of the pendant you carry?" he asked without preamble. I shook my head. "Only that it belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before she died, and your father." "What do you know of him?" The question caught me off guard. "Nothing, Your Majesty. My mother never spoke of him. I assumed he died before I was born." Something flickered across his face. Frustration, perhaps, or impatience. "And what exactly happened when your pendant touched the ceremonial basin? Describe it precisely." I recounted the incident as accurately as I could, describing the silver vapor and the strange sensation that had accompanied it. As I spoke, the king circled his desk, moving to stand directly before me. Even at my full height, I barely reached his shoulder. "You truly don't understand what's happening, do you?" he said, more to himself than to me. "No, Your Majesty, I don't." He studied me for a long moment, then held out his hand. "Your pendant. May I?" Reluctantly, I reached beneath my shirt and pulled out the silver crescent, lifting it over my head. The chain was long enough that I could offer it to him without stepping closer. He took it carefully, turning the pendant over in his fingers, examining the worn symbol etched into its surface. "This is the emblem of the lunar priestesses," he said finally, his voice measured. "A sacred order thought to have died out generations ago, during the Great Wars. They were human women with a rare gift, the ability to temper alpha power, to soothe the beast within us." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "I don't understand what that has to do with me." His eyes lifted from the pendant to my face. "The ceremonial basin you cleaned last night contained elements designed to enhance werewolf mating instincts. Herbs, minerals, and ritual wine infused with the essence of compatible pairs. When your pendant touched those elements, it activated something dormant within you." "Activated what?" I whispered, though a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. "Your heritage," he said simply. "The blood of the lunar priestesses runs in your veins, Eleanor. Your mother must have known, must have protected you by keeping you ignorant of your true nature." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I reached out to steady myself against the edge of his desk. "That's impossible. I'm just human. I've always been just human. You were never just anything." His voice had softened, though the intensity in his eyes remained. Lunar priestesses were revered, protected. They were treasures beyond price to alpha werewolves. Why? Because they could stand at an alpha's side without being crushed by their dominance. because they could touch an alpha's mind, could ease the constant battle we wage against our most primal instincts. He took a step closer, and I felt that same strange energy from the great hall, a crackling tension in the air between us. Because they were the only true mates an alpha could claim without destroying. The implications of his words slowly penetrated my confusion. Are you saying that we're... The moment you walked into that ceremony hall, covered in the sense of ritual and power, your dormant abilities awakened, he continued, ignoring my stammered question. And now every unmated alpha for 100 miles will have caught your scent on the wind. Every one of them will come hunting for you. Fear clutched at my chest. Hunting for me? Why? Because a lunar priestess bound to an alpha pack multiplies their strength tenfold. Because with you at my side, my reign would be uncontested for generations. His eyes darkened, pupils expanding until only a thin ring of green remained. Because the mating pull between an alpha and a priestess is said to be irresistible. As if to demonstrate, he lifted his hand to my face, his fingers hovering just above my cheek without touching. Even without contact, I felt a warmth radiating from his skin to mine, drawing me toward him like a moth to flame. I don't feel any different, I protested weakly, though even as I spoke the words, I recognized the lie in them. Something had changed. I could sense his emotions now. The tightly leashed control, the simmering anger, the hunger that had nothing to do with food. You will? He said, finally allowing his fingers to make contact with my skin. The touch sent a shock wave through my system, a current of sensation that left me gasping. The change has only just begun. His thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone, and I found myself leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at me to maintain distance. This was the Alpha King, a male so powerful that lesser werewolves couldn't meet his gaze without feeling the weight of his dominance. Yet here I stood, a nobody, a servant, apparently holding some power he coveted. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. He withdrew his hand, and I felt its absence like a physical loss. Now I keep you safe until we determine the full extent of your abilities. And until I decide what to do about the bond forming between us. Bond? The word felt heavy, significant. Don't pretend you can't feel it. There was a challenge in his voice now. A dare for me to deny the electric current that seemed to flow between us. Before I could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Nathaniel entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. Forgive the interruption, my king, but we have a situation. His eyes flicked briefly to me before returning to his alpha. Alpha Daemon from the Eastern Territories has arrived unexpectedly. He's requesting an audience, claiming urgent pack business. King Callan's expression hardened, a muscle working in his jaw. Daemon, he muttered, and I detected a note of suspicion in his voice. How convenient that he arrives mere hours after the ceremony. Shall I tell him you're indisposed? Nathaniel asked. The king considered for a moment, then shook his head. No. I want to hear what brought him across the border so quickly. He turned to me. You'll remain here, out of sight. Nathaniel will guard the door. Touch nothing and make no sound. Yes, your majesty, I replied, though my mind was spinning with questions. Who was this Alpha Daemon, and why did his arrival seem to concern King Callan so deeply? Nathaniel, the king continued, prepare the formal receiving hall and alert the royal guard discreetly. I want security doubled, especially around this wing of the pack house. Nathaniel nodded, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his hip. You think he knows about her already? I think we're about to find out. King Callan's gaze returned to me, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Your pendant. He held it out, and when I reached for it, he caught my hand, pressing the silver crescent firmly into my palm and folding my fingers around it. Keep this with you at all times. If anything happens, if anyone tries to separate you from me, use it. Use it how? You'll know. He released my hand but remained close. I must go now. But remember, Eleanor, no matter what you hear, no matter who tries to claim otherwise, you belong to me, and I protect what's mine. With those words, he turned and strode from the room, Nathaniel close at his heels. The door closed with a soft click, and I heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. I was alone in the king's private study, holding a pendant I barely understood, apparently at the center of a power struggle I hadn't known existed until this morning. Outside the window, dark clouds had begun to gather on the horizon, obscuring the mountains and casting the forest into shadow. A storm was coming, both literally and figuratively, and somehow I stood at its center. I paced the king's study, my mind racing as fast as my heart. Just yesterday I had been invisible, unimportant, a shadow girl with a mop and bucket. Now I was supposedly some kind of mystical priestess, locked in the king's private chambers while alpha werewolves potentially fought over me like a prize. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, if not for the very real fear coursing through my veins. I clutched my mother's pendant tightly, trying to reconcile the simple silver crescent with the power King Callan claimed it represented. Had my mother truly known what I was? Had she hidden my heritage deliberately, hoping I would never discover the truth? So many questions, and she was long gone, unable to answer any of them. My restlessness drew me to the bookshelves lining the walls. Perhaps there was something here that could help me understand what was happening. The king had warned me to touch nothing, but surely reading couldn't hurt. My fingers trailed along leather-bound spines, many so old the titles had worn away. Others were written in languages I couldn't decipher, ancient werewolf texts, most likely. One volume caught my eye, smaller than the others, bound in pale blue leather with silver embossing. I carefully pulled it from the shelf, catching my breath as I saw the symbol on its cover. A crescent moon, identical to the one on my pendant. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were thin and delicate, covered in elegant script, the lunar covenant, records of the sacred priestesses and their bonds. I sank into one of the chairs by the fireplace, drawn into the text despite my anxiety. Much of what I read aligned with what the king had told me. The lunar priestesses were indeed human women born with rare abilities, gifts that allowed them to form special bonds with alpha werewolves. They could sense emotions, calm rage, heal spiritual wounds. According to the text, they had once been revered as sacred mediators between packs, their neutrality respected by all. But as I turned the pages, I discovered darker aspects the king had omitted. The bonding process between priestess and alpha was irrevocable, permanent. Once claimed, a priestess was bound to her alpha until death. And the process of claiming, my cheeks heated as I read the intimate details. It required a blood exchange during the height of passion, the alpha's mark upon the priestess's skin, and the consummation of their union beneath the full moon. I closed the book quickly, my heart pounding. Is this what King Callan intended? To claim me as his own, to bind me to him forever. The thought should have horrified me. I barely knew him. He was dangerous, powerful, accustomed to absolute obedience. Yet somewhere deep inside, something responded to the idea. A flutter of anticipation, a whisper of longing that both confused and frightened me. I returned the book to its place on the shelf, just as the sound of raised voices reached me through the thick door. Instinctively, I moved closer, pressing my ear against the wood. Have no right to keep her hidden. A voice I didn't recognize, deep and commanding, though not as compelling as King Callan's. The emergence of a lunar priestess concerns all packs, not just yours, Callan. And yet she was found on my territory, in my ceremonial hall. The king's voice was controlled but threaded with steel. By our oldest laws, that gives me first claim. First claim, perhaps, but not exclusive right. She must be presented to the council. Let her choose her alpha mate freely, as tradition demands. I drew back from the door, stunned by what I was hearing. Choose freely? The king had given me the impression that I already belonged to him, that there was no choice involved. Before I could process this new information, I heard footsteps approaching. I scrambled back to the chair by the fireplace, arranging myself in what I hoped was a casual pose, as though I'd been sitting quietly the entire time. The lock turned, and the door swung open to reveal not King Callan, but a werewolf I'd never seen before. Tall and imposing, with features that might have been carved from granite, and eyes the color of amber, he radiated alpha power almost as strongly as the king himself. This must be Alpha Daemon from the Eastern Territories. He stepped into the room, his gaze fixing on me with an intensity that made me shrink back into the chair. So it's true, he said, his voice softer now than when he'd been arguing with the king. A lunar priestess, after all these generations. I said nothing, uncertain whether I should speak to him at all. Where was King Callan? Why had this stranger been allowed into the room where I was supposed to remain hidden? You have nothing to fear from me, Alpha Daemon continued, taking another step forward. I'm not here to harm you, only to ensure you understand your rights. My rights? I found my voice at last, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. Has Callan explained what you are? What it means? When I nodded hesitantly, he smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. And did he explain that by our oldest laws, a lunar priestess has the right to choose her mate from among the alphas who present themselves to her? That you cannot be claimed against your will? I clutched my pendant tighter. He said I belonged to him. Alpha Daemon's smile vanished. Of course he did. Callan has always believed himself above our laws, entitled to whatever he desires. He moved closer, and I caught his scent. Pine forests after a snowfall, clean and sharp. But you should know that other options exist. Other alphas who would value your gift, who would treat you not as a possession but as a true mate. Other alphas like you? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. He laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. I would be honored to be considered, yes. But there are others as well. The important thing is that you have a choice. Before I could respond, the door burst open again, and King Callan stood in the entrance, his expression thunderous. I don't recall inviting you into my private study, Daemon. The other alpha turned slowly, seemingly unperturbed by the king's obvious rage. I was merely introducing myself to the priestess, ensuring she understands her position. Her position, King Callan growled, is under my protection, and you have overstayed your welcome in my territory. The tension between the two alphas was palpable, filling the room like a physical presence. I felt it press against my skin, making it difficult to breathe. Without thinking, I rose to my feet, stepping between them. Please, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. There's no need for conflict. Something strange happened then. As I spoke, I felt a warmth spreading from my chest outward, like ripples in still water. Both alphas seemed to feel it too, their aggressive stances softening almost imperceptibly. King Callan's eyes widened slightly as he looked at me. Your abilities are awakening faster than I anticipated. Alpha Daemon studied me with renewed interest. Indeed, and impressively strong, to affect two alphas simultaneously. He turned back to the king. You can't keep her isolated forever, Callan. Word is already spreading. By nightfall, more will come. Let them come, King Callan replied coldly. My decision stands. Now leave, before I forget the courtesy due to a visiting alpha. For a moment, I thought Alpha Daemon might refuse, might challenge the king directly. But after a tense pause, he inclined his head slightly, not quite submission, but acknowledgement. Until the next full moon then, he said, his gaze shifting back to me, when the council meets and all claims must be presented formally. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, extending it toward me. A token, if you'll accept it. It was a carved wooden wolf, small enough to fit in my palm, beautifully detailed. Before I could decide whether to accept it, King Callan stepped forward, placing himself partially between me and the other alpha. No tokens, no gifts, he said firmly. Not until the council. Alpha Daemon's expression hardened, but he returned the carving to his pocket. As you wish. Remember though, priestess, your power is your own. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. With those parting words, he turned and left. As soon as the door closed behind him, King Callan rounded on me. What did he say to you? Only what you apparently didn't, that I have the right to choose my own mate. The words came out sharper than I intended, fueled by confusion and the lingering effects of fear. Something dangerous flickered in the king's eyes. Is that what you want? To be paraded before every power-hungry alpha in the territory, each of them trying to seduce or intimidate you into choosing them? He moved closer, towering over me. Do you have any idea what would happen to you without my protection? I don't know what to want, I burst out, surprising both of us with my vehemence. Yesterday I was scrubbing floors and trying to stay invisible. Today I'm told I have some mystical power that makes me valuable to people who never even looked at me before. How am I supposed to feel about any of this? I expected anger at my outburst, but instead, something softened in his expression. "You're right," he said quietly. "This isn't fair to you." His unexpected acknowledgement deflated my anger, leaving only confusion and exhaustion in its wake. I sank back into the chair, suddenly feeling the effects of a night without sleep. "I need to understand what's happening to me," I said finally, looking up at him. "All of it. Not just the parts you think I should know." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well." He moved to sit in the chair opposite mine, close enough that our knees nearly touched. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Starting with why you told me I belong to you, when apparently I have the right to choose." A muscle worked in his jaw, but he answered evenly enough. "By ancient law, the Alpha on whose territory a lunar priestess emerges has first claim, the right to present his suit before any others. It doesn't guarantee acceptance, but it's a position of advantage." His eyes held mine. "And I intend to use every advantage I have." "Why? You don't even know me. Until this morning, I was just a servant in your pack, and yet I noticed you long before this morning." I blinked in surprise. "That's not possible. We've never met before today." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "We haven't spoken before today, but did you truly think the Alpha of the pack wouldn't be aware of every member under his protection, even the quiet human girl who keeps to herself and carries a forbidden silver pendant?" Heat rushed to my face. "You knew about the pendant?" "I knew something was different about you from the moment you arrived 3 years ago. I didn't know what you were. The lunar priestesses were thought extinct, their bloodlines lost centuries ago." He leaned forward slightly. "But I recognized someone who didn't quite belong, who carried secrets. It intrigued me." I struggled to process this information. All this time, while I'd believed myself invisible, the king had been aware of me, had watched me perhaps. The thought sent an unexpected shiver through me. "And now that you know what I am?" His gaze intensified. "Now I understand why I was drawn to you even before your abilities awakened. The bond between an Alpha and a lunar priestess begins forming before either is aware of it. It's instinctive, primal, like fate." I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "I prefer to think of it as recognition. Something in me recognized something in you, even when we both wore different faces to the world." There was a poetry to his words that I hadn't expected from the formidable Alpha King. It stirred something within me, a longing for connection I'd buried since my mother's death. "What happens now?" I asked, echoing my earlier question. "Now," he said, rising to his feet, "we prepare you to face what's coming. Other Alphas will arrive, each hoping to sway you, to form a bond before the council meeting at the full moon. You need to understand your own abilities, to strengthen them, so you can't be manipulated or coerced. And how do I do that? Training. With me." He extended his hand to me. "Starting now." I hesitated, looking at his outstretched hand. Taking it felt significant, like crossing a threshold I couldn't return from. "And if I refuse?" His expression remained steady. "Then I'll respect your choice. I'll still protect you. You're under my pack's care regardless of personal matters. But I believe you'll be safer, stronger, if we work together." I searched his face for deception, but found only determination and something else. A vulnerability that seemed at odds with his powerful presence. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. The contact sent that now familiar current of energy between us, stronger than before. His fingers closed around mine, warm and surprisingly gentle for hands that could transform into deadly claws. "The first lesson," he said softly, "is about control. The energy you feel now between us. You need to learn to direct it, to shape it to your will rather than allowing it to overwhelm you." "How?" "Close your eyes," he instructed. When I hesitated, he added, "Trust must begin somewhere, Eleanor." Reluctantly, I closed my eyes, acutely aware of his hand still holding mine, of his presence mere inches away. The power of a lunar priestess comes from balance, the harmony between moon and wolf, human and beast, calm and passion. His voice had lowered, becoming almost hypnotic. "Focus on the energy flowing between us. Can you feel it?" I nodded, unable to deny the pulsing current that seemed to connect us. Now imagine gathering that energy, drawing it into yourself, like pulling on a thread. I tried to visualize what he described, concentrating on the sensation. To my surprise, the energy responded, coalescing into something I could almost grasp mentally. "Good," he murmured, and I realized he could feel what I was doing. "Now direct it outward again, but with purpose. Think of calm, serenity." I focused on memories of peaceful moments. Early mornings when the pack house was still quiet, the forest at dusk, my mother's soft humming as she brushed my hair. The energy shifted, taking on the quality of those memories, flowing from me back to him. His sharp intake of breath told me it had worked. "Open your eyes," he said, his voice rougher than before. When I did, I found his expression transformed. The perpetual tension in his features had eased, his eyes wider, more vulnerable than I'd seen them. "That," he said quietly, "is just the beginning of what you're capable of." For the first time since this strange day began, I felt a flicker of something beyond fear and confusion, a sense of possibility, of power that belonged to me alone. Before I could respond, a sharp knock at the door broke the moment. King Callan released my hand reluctantly, turning toward the interruption. "Enter," he commanded. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Forgive me, my king, but we have a situation at the borders. Multiple Alpha signatures have been detected approaching from different directions." King Callan's expression hardened once more into the mask of the Alpha King. "So it begins. Earlier than expected, but not unanticipated." He turned back to me. "It seems your training will have to continue under less ideal circumstances." "What's happening?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "They're coming for you," he said simply. The word has spread faster than I'd hoped. Fear clutched at my heart again, but beneath it was something new, a determination I hadn't felt before. Whatever was happening, whatever I was becoming, I would face it standing, not cowering. "Then we should be ready for them," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Something like pride flickered in the king's eyes. "Yes," he agreed, "we should." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. King Callan transformed the pack house into a fortress, positioning guards at every entrance, sending scouts to monitor the approaching alphas. I remained at his side throughout, watching as he commanded his forces with the calm efficiency of a born leader. "They won't attack directly," he explained as we walked the perimeter of the inner courtyard. "That would violate treaty law, but they'll push the boundaries of hospitality, seeking private audiences, offering gifts, attempting to form connections. All for me," I murmured, still struggling to reconcile my former invisibility with my sudden importance. "All for the power they believe you represent," he corrected. "Few, if any, care about the woman behind the abilities." His words stung with truth. "And you? Do you see beyond the priestess to the woman?" He stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "I saw the woman before I knew of the priestess," he reminded me. "But I won't pretend your abilities aren't valuable to me as Alpha King. I protect hundreds of lives, maintain peace across territories that once knew only war. A lunar priestess at my side would strengthen my position, allow me to better safeguard what I've built." His honesty was refreshing, if somewhat painful. At least he didn't resort to pretty lies. "And what would I gain from such an arrangement?" I asked boldly. A smile touched his lips. "Protection, power, position, the chance to use your gifts to benefit many rather than scrubbing floors in obscurity." He stepped closer. "And me, Eleanor. You would have me. All of me. Not just the king, but the man." Heat bloomed in my chest at his words, at the intensity in his gaze. Before I could respond, Nathaniel approached, interrupting the charged moment. "The first of them has arrived at the gates," he reported. "Alpha Kieran of the Northern Range, requesting formal hospitality." King Callan's expression darkened. "Kieran, I might have known he'd be among the first." He turned to me. "We can't refuse him entry without violating pack law, but I want you to stay away from him. He's dangerous, cunning in ways Damon is not." "You can't shield her from all suitors," Nathaniel pointed out. The council will insist she meet each alpha who presents a formal claim. Then we make sure she's prepared. The king's gaze returned to me. The training we began must continue, but we'll have to adapt. No alpha can demand a private audience with you before the council, but they'll seek opportunities to approach you at communal gatherings, meals, ceremonies. So what do? I asked, anxiety building in my chest. You observe. You learn to recognize manipulation, to feel the difference between genuine interest and hunger for power. His expression softened slightly. And you trust your instincts, Eleanor. They're stronger than you know. Before nightfall, 3 more alphas had arrived, each powerful, each determined, each with their own territories and packs. King Callan was required by ancient custom to host a welcoming feast where the visiting alphas would be formally introduced to the pack, and to me. I spent the remaining daylight hours with Lyra, the beta female's assistant, who had been tasked with preparing me for the evening. If she resented being assigned to the human servant she'd previously ignored, she hid it well, efficiently transforming me from a cleaning girl to something approximating royalty. The king has commanded you be treated as an honored guest, she explained, as she helped me into a gown of midnight blue that flowed like water. Your position is unprecedented. You mean no one quite knows what to do with me? I said wryly. She smiled slightly as she arranged my hair, weaving silver threads that caught the light like stars. The older wolves are especially unsettled. The lunar priestesses are more legend than history to most of us, bedtime stories, not living women who appear in our ceremonial halls. When she finished, I hardly recognized the woman in the looking glass. Gone was the invisible servant. In her place stood someone who looked as though she belonged at the king's side. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation through me. My pendant rested against my skin beneath the gown, a comforting weight, a reminder of who I truly was beneath the finery. I touched the spot where it lay hidden, drawing strength from its presence. King Callan came to escort me to the feast himself, a gesture that set tongues wagging throughout the pack house. When he saw me, he paused at the threshold of my borrowed chamber, something like wonder crossing his features. You look... He seemed to search for the right word. Like yourself. The self that was always there beneath the servant's clothes. It was perhaps the most beautiful compliment I'd ever received. He offered his arm, and as I placed my hand upon it, that now familiar current flowed between us, stronger than before. Remember what we practiced, he murmured as we walked toward the great hall. If you feel overwhelmed by their presence, focus on gathering the energy within yourself first, then directing it outward with intention. I nodded, grateful for his guidance despite my lingering uncertainty about his motives. Whatever game was being played around me, King Callan remained my surest ally in a rapidly shifting landscape. The great hall had been transformed from the ceremonial space I'd cleaned just that morning into a lavish banquet setting. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe formation filled the space, already crowded with pack members in their finest attire. At the center of the head table stood 5 ornate chairs, one for the king, and one each for the visiting alphas. A hush fell over the gathering as we entered, hundreds of eyes turning to watch our progress. I felt their stares like physical touches, curious, evaluating, some hostile. My fingers tightened on the king's arm. Breathe, he reminded me softly. You belong here now. Do I wondered, but straightened my spine and lifted my chin, determined not to show fear. King Callan led me to a seat at the head table, positioned between his own chair and an empty place that I assumed was reserved for one of the visiting alphas. A strategic placement, ensuring I would be partially shielded by his presence. As the king raised his hand for silence, the last murmurs of conversation died away. Tonight we welcome distinguished guests to our territory, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the hall. And we celebrate an event not seen in generations, the emergence of a lunar priestess among us. Whispers erupted at his formal acknowledgement, though most of the pack had already heard the rumors. He continued, As tradition demands, we extend hospitality to those who would present their suits before the Council of Alphas at the next full moon. One by one, he introduced the visiting alphas. Alpha Daemon from the Eastern Territories, whom I'd already met. Alpha Kirin of the Northern Range, a lean wolf with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. Alpha Thorn of the Mountain Clans, massive and solemn, with a battle scar bisecting his left eyebrow. And Alpha Severin of the Coastal Packs, older than the others, his silver-streaked dark hair and watchful gaze suggesting wisdom tempered by experience. Each alpha acknowledged the introduction with varying degrees of formality, but their eyes all found me, lingering with undisguised interest. I struggled not to shrink under their collective gaze, reminding myself that I possessed power they wanted, power that gave me value beyond my previous existence. The feast began, servers bringing platters laden with roasted meats, fresh breads, and seasonal fruits. I found myself seated beside Alpha Severin, whose calm demeanor felt less threatening than the others. "You seem uncomfortable with the attention, priestess," he observed quietly as he served himself from a nearby platter. "Until yesterday, no one noticed me at all," I admitted. "The change is disorienting." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sudden elevation can be more difficult than gradual ascent. The view changes too quickly, leaves one dizzy." His eyes, a warm amber, studied me with genuine curiosity. "May I ask how your abilities manifested?" Before I could respond, King Callan's hand covered mine on the table, a gesture that appeared casual but carried clear meaning. "The specifics of the priestess's awakening will be shared at the council meeting, as tradition dictates," he said smoothly. "Tonight is for welcome, not interrogation." Alpha Severin inclined his head respectfully. "Of course, King Callan. I meant no intrusion." Throughout the meal, similar exchanges occurred, careful questions from the visiting alphas, protective interventions from the king. I observed the dynamics with growing awareness, beginning to recognize the subtle power plays, the calculated remarks designed to probe my character or trigger emotional responses. Alpha Kirin was perhaps the most persistent, his approach more direct than the others. "I wonder," he said during a lull in conversation, his voice pitched to carry to those nearby, "if our priestess truly understands the significance of her choice. The Northern Range offers advantages other territories cannot. Ancient sites of lunar power, preserved texts from the original priestess covens, training resources unmatched elsewhere. You speak as though her decision should be based on practical considerations alone," Alpha Daemon countered. "The bond between priestess and alpha transcends such mundane factors." "Does it?" Alpha Kirin's smile was sharp. "Or is that simply what alphas with less to offer would have her believe?" I felt the tension rising between them, their competing dominance pressing against my senses like storm clouds gathering. Without thinking, I reached for the calming energy I'd practiced with King Callan, drawing it into myself before releasing it like a gentle wave across the table. The effect was immediate, subtle, but unmistakable. The aggressive posturing eased, the charged atmosphere dissipating like morning mist. All 4 visiting alphas turned to look at me with renewed interest, and I realized too late that I'd revealed more of my developing abilities than perhaps was wise. King Callan's eyes held a mixture of pride and concern when they met mine. "It seems our priestess grows stronger by the hour," he remarked, his casual tone belied by the warning in his gaze. After the feast, tradition required a period of mingling, allowing pack members to formally greet their visitors. King Callan kept me close, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back as we moved through the crowd. Though the gesture appeared possessive, I recognized it now as protective, a barrier between me and those who might seek to isolate or influence me. "You're doing well," he murmured, during a brief moment alone. "But be cautious with displays of your abilities. Each revelation gives them more information, more ways to potentially manipulate you." "I didn't plan it," I confessed. "It just happened." "Your instincts responded to perceived threat." "That's natural, but—" He broke off as Alpha Thorn approached, the Mountain Clan leader's massive form parting the crowd effortlessly. "Priestess," he rumbled, his deep voice matching his imposing presence. "I've observed you throughout the evening. You carry yourself with dignity despite your sudden elevation." He extended his hand, palm up. "Would you honor me with a moment of conversation? With your alpha's permission, of course," he added, glancing at King Callan. I hesitated, looking to the king for guidance. His expression revealed nothing, though I sensed his reluctance. "A brief conversation," he conceded finally, Within sight of the gathering, Alpha Thorn led me to a small alcove at the edge of the hall, still visible but offering a modicum of privacy. Up close, the battle scar across his eyebrow looked even more fearsome, speaking of survived violence. "You must have many questions," he said without preamble. "Many fears." His directness surprised me. "Yes," I admitted. "Everything has changed so quickly. Change reveals character, both yours and those around you." His gaze moved deliberately to King Callan, who watched us from across the room. He is powerful, respected, but ruthless when necessary. All alphas are. The question is whether his ruthlessness serves merely his ambition or a greater purpose. "And you?" I asked. "What purpose does your ruthlessness serve?" A smile cracked his severe expression. "My people have survived in the mountains for centuries, through wars, hunts, and betrayals. We endure because we value strength, not just of body, but of spirit." He studied me intently. "You have the latter, I think, though it's yet untested. Why tell me this? Because unlike the others, I will not promise you riches, power, or luxury. The mountains are beautiful but harsh. Life there requires fortitude." He straightened to his full, impressive height. "What I offer is honesty, protection, and purpose. Nothing less, nothing more." With those words, he bowed slightly and withdrew, leaving me to ponder his unusual approach. Before I could make sense of the encounter, Alpha Kieran materialized beside me, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. "Such solemn conversation from our mountain friend," he remarked, his voice silky. "Allow me to offer more pleasant diversion." I endured Alpha Kieran's company for as long as politeness required, weathering his thinly veiled questions and subtle attempts to establish connection. Unlike Alpha Thorn's straightforward approach, Kieran employed charm and flattery, each compliment designed to lower my defenses. "Your awakening is a sign," he told me, leaning closer than was comfortable. "The old powers returning when the packs need them most. It can't be coincidence that you emerged here now at this critical juncture." "What critical juncture?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my wariness. His eyes glinted. Tensions between territories grow. Resources diminish. Old alliances fray. The strong will survive what's coming, while the weak— He left the implication hanging. "The Northern Range has prepared. We've built reserves, fortifications, alliances with neighboring human settlements. A priestess at our center would ensure our dominance in the new order." The nakedness of his ambition was almost refreshing after the other's more veiled approaches. I was spared having to respond when King Callan appeared at my side, his timing impeccable. "The hour grows late," he announced, his tone making it clear this was not merely an observation. "Our guests have traveled far and should rest before tomorrow's activities." Alpha Kieran's smile tightened, but he inclined his head in acquiescence. "Until tomorrow then, priestess." He took my hand before I could withdraw it, pressing his lips to my knuckles in a gesture that felt more possessive than respectful. As the gathering dispersed, King Callan escorted me from the great hall, his expression stormy. "What did Kieran say to you?" he demanded once we were alone in the corridor. "He spoke of tensions between territories, diminishing resources. He implied that conflict is coming." The king's jaw tightened. "Kieran doesn't just predict conflict. He creates it. His territory has been encroaching on neighboring lands for years, provoking border disputes he can use to justify expansion." His eyes met mine. "If he claims a lunar priestess, his power would grow exponentially. Few would be able to stand against him. Is that why you want me? To prevent others from having what I can provide?" His expression softened marginally. "That's part of it," he admitted. "I'd be a fool to pretend otherwise. But it's not my only reason." He stepped closer, his scent enveloping me, that intoxicating blend of cedar and rain that had begun to feel like safety. "I told you before. I noticed you long before I knew what you were. There has always been something between us, Eleanor, whether you felt it or not." I wanted to believe him. Perhaps some part of me already did. But doubt lingered. The natural skepticism of someone who had spent years being overlooked, suddenly finding herself the center of attention. "I need time," I said finally, "to understand what I am, what I want." He nodded, though reluctance showed in the tension of his shoulders. Time is the one thing in short supply, but I'll give you what I can." His hand rose, fingertips just barely brushing my cheek. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." He was right. The following days brought increasing pressure as more alphas arrived, each intent on making their case, establishing their superiority. Some brought lavish gifts, jewels, rare books, ceremonial artifacts. Others demonstrated their strength or intelligence, staging elaborate displays meant to impress. Throughout it all, King Callan remained a steady presence at my side, both shield and guide as I navigated the treacherous waters of pack politics. During stolen moments alone, we continued my training, exercises to control my emerging abilities, to direct them with purpose rather than instinct. "Focus," he instructed, as we stood in his private garden, the setting sun casting long shadows across the carefully tended plants. "Feel the energy within you, then extend it outward, like invisible fingers reaching for my thoughts." I closed my eyes, concentrating on the warm current that now flowed continuously between us. When we were this close, I could sense the edges of his emotions. Determination, concern, and something deeper, warmer, that flared whenever our skin touched. Gradually, I learned to push beyond those surface impressions, to touch the more complex layers beneath. Glimpses of memory, fragments of thought, never complete, but enough to convince me that his interest was genuine, his intentions more honorable than I'd initially feared. On the third day, as the full moon drew closer, a final visitor arrived, not an alpha, but a beta female from a distant pack who claimed knowledge of the lunar priestesses. Sarah was older than most werewolves I'd met, her silver hair and lined face suggesting decades of life. "My grandmother was the daughter of the last known priestess," she explained as we sat in the quiet library, away from the constant scrutiny of the visiting alphas. The knowledge was passed down, preserved, though diluted with each generation. King Callan had arranged this meeting, sensing that I needed guidance from someone other than himself, someone without a personal stake in my choice. He stood guard at the door, but remained silent, allowing Sarah to speak freely. "The priestesses were never meant to be possessions," she told me, her weathered hands clasping mine. "Nor were they meant to be weapons. They were balancers, mediators between the human and wolf natures that war within all shifters. A priestess bonded to an alpha doesn't just amplify his power, she stabilizes it, allows for clearer thought, greater control. Is that why they want me so badly?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Some, yes. The wisest among them recognize the true value, not domination but harmony. Others see only the power, the advantage in battles yet to come." Her grip tightened. "You must look beyond their words, child. Observe how they treat those weaker than themselves. Watch how they handle frustration, defiance. An alpha's true nature shows in unguarded moments, not in carefully crafted courtship." Her advice resonated with what I had already begun to observe. Alpha Damon's smooth charm concealed a calculating mind. Alpha Kieran's ambition outweighed any genuine interest in me as a person. Alpha Thorn's bluntness masked a deeper complexity. Alpha Severin's apparent wisdom came with rigid traditionalism that might become stifling. And King Callan? His protective instincts sometimes veered into possessiveness. His royal authority occasionally bordered on arrogance. Yet I'd seen him show unexpected gentleness, vulnerability even, in our private moments. "How will I know?" I asked Sarah. "When the time comes to choose, how will I know it's right?" Her aged eyes held mine steadily. "The moon will guide you, child. When the full light shines, when the ceremonial circle is drawn, and each alpha presents his claim, your blood will recognize its match." She touched the spot where my pendant rested beneath my dress. "Trust the ancient magic that flows through you. It is wiser than any conscious thought." The night before the full moon, restlessness drove me from my chamber. The pack house had grown stifling with the presence of so many powerful beings, each radiating ambition and desire. I needed air, space, a moment alone with my thoughts before tomorrow's ceremony would seal my fate. The private garden where I'd trained with King Callan offered sanctuary. The night air carried the scent of night-blooming flowers, their pale petals luminous in the nearly full moonlight. I wandered among them, fingers trailing over soft leaves, my mind racing with the weight of the choice before me. You shouldn't be alone. The voice came from the shadows, and I turned to find Alpha Kieran watching me, his lean form almost predatory in the moonlight. Not on the eve of such an important day. Alarm prickled along my spine. I needed a moment of solitude, I replied, striving to keep my voice even. To prepare myself. He moved closer, and I noticed with growing unease that he had positioned himself between me and the garden entrance. Preparation is wise, as is recognizing opportunity when it presents itself. His smile did nothing to soften the hunger in his eyes. We could forge our bond now, before tomorrow's formalities. The others need never know until it's too late to challenge. That would violate the sacred traditions, I said, backing away slowly. He laughed softly. Traditions are tools for those who know how to use them, and obstacles to be circumvented when necessary. Another step forward, his intent becoming unmistakable. The Northern Range needs your power now, not after some ceremonial pageantry. My hand closed around my pendant through the fabric of my dress, drawing strength from its familiar contours. I will not be claimed against my will, I said firmly, summoning the energy I'd been practicing with King Callan. Your will is still forming, Kieran countered, closing the distance between us. I'm simply helping it form correctly. As his hand reached for my arm, I pulled my pendant from beneath my dress, clutching it tightly. Use it, King Callan had said. You'll know how. Instinct guided me as I held it before me like a shield, focusing all my intention, all my newly awakened power into the silver crescent. The effect was immediate and astonishing. Brilliant silver light erupted from the pendant, pulsing outward in concentric rings. Alpha Kieran recoiled, a pained snarl escaping him as the light touched his skin. You dare, he growled, his features beginning the partial transformation that preceded a full shift. You'll regret this defiance, priestess. Before he could lunge, a darker shadow detached itself from the garden wall, King Callan, moving with the lethal grace of an apex predator. He placed himself between us, his stance protective yet controlled. The priestess has rejected your advance, he said, his voice dangerously soft. By pack law, you must withdraw. Kieran's face contorted with rage. This changes nothing. Tomorrow she chooses before the council. My claim remains. As does mine, King Callan replied evenly. But know this. If you ever approach her alone again, tradition won't save you from my response. The two alphas faced each other, tension crackling between them like lightning. For a moment, I feared they would fight there in the moonlit garden. But finally Kieran stepped back, his expression settling into cold calculation. Until tomorrow, then, he turned to me. Choose wisely, priestess. Some rejections carry consequences beyond the moment. With that ominous statement, he withdrew into the shadows. When he had gone, King Callan turned to me, concern replacing the deadly focus of moments before. Are you hurt? I shook my head, still gripping my pendant, which now glowed with gentle silver light. How did you know? I felt your fear, he said simply. Through the bond that's forming between us. I felt your fear, your determination. His fingers brushed mine where they clutched the pendant. And your power. You defended yourself well. He won't give up, I said, gazing toward where Alpha Kieran had disappeared. No, he won't. King Callan's expression hardened momentarily before softening as he looked at me. But neither will I. In that moment, standing in the moonlit garden with him, the choice that had seemed so impossible began to crystallize. I thought of Sarah's words. Watch how they treat those weaker than themselves, how they handle frustration and defiance. I had seen King Callan's authority, his occasional arrogance, but I had also witnessed his restraint, his respect for my boundaries, even when it clearly tested his patience. Tomorrow I make my choice, I said quietly. He nodded, his eyes holding mine. Yes. What if the council disagrees? What if other alphas challenge? A smile touched his lips, confident but not cruel. Let them. Some battles are worth fighting. His hand rose to cup my cheek, the touch sending that familiar warmth cascading through me. Some bonds cannot be broken, even by force. As we stood there under the nearly full moon, the pendant glowing softly between us, I felt the final piece of uncertainty fall away. Tomorrow would bring ceremony, tradition, perhaps even conflict. But tonight I knew with sudden clarity what my heart had been telling me since that first electric touch in the great hall. I belonged here, not as a servant or a symbol or a prize to be won, but as a woman coming into her power, choosing her own path. And if that path led to the side of an alpha king who saw me before anyone else did, who recognized my value when I was still scrubbing floors and hiding in shadows, then perhaps fate had been kinder than I'd ever dared to hope.